Good evening. Thank you for the introduction. I'm just starting my timer here. Okay. I don't want to run over. I have quite a few slides. Oh, and this is on a, it's actually advancing. Okay, let's see here how this works. I don't want it to be sliding, like advancing on its own. Oh, I don't want slideshow. I want to be able to advance it. Okay. Great, perfect, thank you. Okay, great. Well, I just want to thank, to start, Suzanne Fisher-Sterling and Melanie Douglas. Last year at this time, I brought a group of students from Columbia. I was teaching an architecture studio, and we looked at the museum, and it was an amazing experience for the students and also for me, too, as a way to start to question through a design studio the issue of women in design and in architecture specifically, and to do that through rethinking the museum program and exhibition space and archive, and it was really sort of an opportunity for the students to engage in a real site through these issues, so I really appreciate that, and also just to thank Helen Bechtel, who helped me in organizing the studio and coming here. And I think from that, we also started talking about this conversation tonight, so I'm really pleased to be here with Amy and Jody as well. So I just want to show very briefly some of the work from the students, and these are all hypothetical. They're not actually going to happen, just so no one gets nervous. But the students had, I think, quite great imagination. This one imagined sort of sleeping even in the museum, so never kind of leaving and being fully absorbed in possibilities. Here we are at the final review on the Columbia campus. I would say that the studio was part of, or is part of, a kind of group of 3 projects in a way that I've been working on for a long time. I have finished my undergraduate education about 25 years ago, and when I was a student, I also worked on the issue of women and housing, and specifically looking at that history in New York City, and it's of course something I still do today. At Columbia, I teach primarily issues around urban housing, and largely look at the subject. So it's something that's I'm very interested in, and do that both in my academic research, but also in my practice, Moss, excuse me, and sorry. And so as part of this, there are kind of 3 projects: design studio, there's also writing, a variety of writing projects that I've undertaken over the years, and also a seminar that I'm going to present, which was started in conjunction with the studio in a way, and a little bit starting before that, a program called Women Writing, and I'll get to that in a minute. In looking at this idea of women architects, which is something I think for as long as I've been in the profession has been a question in terms of, do we call ourselves women architects or just architects? And it's something that's still debated. But in the studio, I think within the first week of the design studio, the students began their research into women architects, and I asked them to look at a woman architect and a woman artist, and just to sort of find things that they like, that they're interested in, and they began to look, as most students do today now, on the internet. Even though our school has one of the most famous architecture libraries in the world, and it's downstairs even from their desks, still it's, this is the medium that we're confronted with. And after, sort of visiting a few different students and coming to their desks, starting to see over and over again images like this where we see Arua Nishizawa on the left and Kazuo Sajima on the right, who have a practice together, a very famous practice called Sana. They also do work on their own independently. But what I noticed with the students was that on the left, if you can see, his images are largely of his work, and then a few images of him as a person, as a figure. On the right, we see primarily images of her and only a few images of her work. And I thought, well, surely that's just a kind of fluke. It can't be anything. But I assure you, if you go back after this tonight and do a search on your computer, you will too find that there are many more images of women than their actual work. And maybe we shouldn't really be too concerned about it, but I thought it was curious, and why is that? And it led me to think a lot about things like bibliographies and syllabuses and design projects and assignments and so on. And so thinking, how do we effectively create and contribute to maybe changing what seems to be an imbalance. And how do we do that? In part, when you click on some of these images, they will take you to not their firm's website, but to articles and publications about their work. Inevitably, the majority, I would say, of these images will link then to projects. However, it's not until you've gone through the image of the figure. And so why is that? I don't know. I don't necessarily have an answer tonight about this. Is it that we need to show an image of a woman in order to understand that there are women architects out there? And I think there are a lot more women architects today than when I started, or they're certainly much more visible. There are a lot more women architecture students than there were when I was a student, and there are a lot more women faculty, and certainly a lot more deans today. But I think our jobs are not done, and we still have work to do, whether we want to acknowledge being a woman architect or just being an architect. And similarly, I think this is a question for everyone, not just for women architects. So to that end, my practice and my work has to do with writing about books. I'm an architect, I'm an educator, I'm a writer or author. These are some of the books that I've worked on my own, but also with my practice, Moss, and with my partner, Michael, who's also my husband. And recently we've completed a book here, this one, which I'll talk about in a little bit, called an Unfinished Encyclopedia of Scale Figures Without Architecture, where we looked at a variety of architectural drawings, mostly by architects that are celebrated, that are in the canon, remove the architecture, and what's left is just the scale figure. There's over 1,000 pages in this book. I'll show you a couple of those images a little bit later. But that's also an issue around representation, and what we can see largely is what's very interesting is the way that women have been depicted, represented, illustrated throughout kind of architectural history. And that's something that I think we could talk about in the discussion even. Here you can see a little bit. In addition to practice, in our office, we're working on a variety of different kinds of projects, whether we're doing bookshops and art projects to housing projects. This is a project in Mexico City where we've worked with 32 other Mexican and international offices to design small houses, and we designed the education center. We're very interested in that, recently completed, as well as doing some housing projects here in Washington, D.C., a design project in the Design District in Miami, more housing in D.C., architecture school in France and Denmark, and also that these projects are also about being published and being in books, and that as part of these books, we're not just doing buildings and publishing our work in books, but we invite in every single book that we're doing of different authors, and we ask people to write not necessarily about our work, but about architecture in general. So always trying to create an opportunity for others to engage in architecture and give a format. I think part of this interest comes from, I would say, even a time when I was a student, so in 1993, as a student, I wasn't exposed to this subject of women in architecture at all. The precedents, the work was always about a kind of male figure and a few figures at that, so a very limited role. I had to look elsewhere to find what was at that time a kind of new kind of subject, which was about gender. This is from a symposium held by ENI in New York in November of 1993. So for me, it's always been about a kind of looking beyond the discipline and the bounds and to push further. And so later on, in the last 5 years, I've been working on research around an architect, Nathalie Dubois, who's also a Columbia graduate, and working through Avery Library and through the archive of an architect, Gordon Bunshaft, who Nathalie Dubois worked with for decades. A lot has been written about her and the difficulties she had in her practice at that time. In this case, what I wanted to find was not a kind of rehashing of that, but could we think again about these women architects' roles and what they actually are doing and their relationship to the architecture itself. So this is a very small archive, album photographed by Ezra Stoller. This is showing Natalie in a meeting with Gordon Bunshaft and the owner of this company, where they've gone to look at this installation of a furniture display, an office done by Florence Knoll. Much has been written about the way Dubois appears in her dress, etc. Not much has really been written about the actual work, though, I would say. And herein lies, I think, the problem, to some degree, that we face as women architects, is that a lot has been written about us in terms of a kind of biography. But when it comes to actually writing about the work, we cannot seem to get to it without going through the biography, whereas a lot of male figures and architects very successful are building, are writing. These books are then in turn used in academia. For instance, Peter Eisenman's book, where he writes about 10 canonical buildings. It's not a surprise that they are all built by men and written about them. So it's not to say they shouldn't be studied. These are fantastic pieces of architecture, for sure. But we don't have something in a similar way. We have other projects. This is a project by Mary McLeod and Victoria Rosner, Pioneering Women, which is done through the Beverly Willis Foundation, to, again, archive and show women architects and their work. What I'm really interested in is, can we further this? Can we push this more? And can we be much more specific about what we're doing? And so I started this series called Women Writing, where I'm actively inviting women architects to come and present short essays about their own design work. So asking them to take a very strong position and tell us what their work is about. So here, so just briefly, with Anna Pujanier from Mayo, Mimi Huang from N-Architects, and Jing Liu from Soil. This goes parallel with a seminar that I've been teaching at Columbia called Architect Writers, where I look at 12 different women architects and their writings in relation to their built work. So beginning with Jane Drew, I'll go through this very quickly. Jane Drew, who founded a magazine, which was a very well-known architectural journal after she graduated, and she also started her own practice with just women. Architect's Yearbook. She would go on to develop a kitchen, and many of its standards have been kept since that time. Along with her husband, she had a very successful practice and wrote books like Architecture and the Environment, building in places like India and Africa. She also did a kind of very well-known interview with another husband-wife team, Allison and Peter Smithson, published. This is Allison Smithson writing, you can see with the typewriter, but also on the job site. So in this case, kind of looking at the figure through writing, but at the same time simultaneously looking at the work of building. And some of these buildings, those of you in architecture will know that they're controversial, but nonetheless, as a kind of practice. And Denise Scott Brown, a very famous architect, also husband-wife team, in this case presenting the syllabus from Learning from Las Vegas, or the Architecture of Well-Being presented at Harvard University in comparison to some of the built work. I think these are some of the images that are much more familiar, let's say, to what an architect would be doing. I'll skip this one. And then recently, there has been increasing recognition for the work of women architects who are writing and collecting their writings, such as in this series through the AA in London, Having Words by Denise Scott Brown, to someone like Lena Bobardi, who had a kind of similar path in a way in terms of writing, like Jane Drew, working on a magazine and journal, an Italian architect relocated to Brazil and built her own house in Sao Paulo, and also wrote an essay about that. These are some of her scale figures. They're quite wonderful and beautiful, my favorite in the book that we made. I also had a great opportunity to work with the Het Nooy Institute in Rotterdam, and we brought Afina de Jong over to present her videos and her book and writings about the city, to someone like Sophia von Elrichhausen, a Chilean architect who has been building and publishing, Madeline Vriesendorp, Anne Lacatan, and Vassal, also working on housing, Moma Yo, and her work on drawing and behavior, to Tatiana Bilbao and housing and writing, and Miriam Camara, who is working right now with David Adjaye as a Rolex Fellow, has an incredible website, I would say what's incredible is the blog, and to be able to show her work. And so the students then, as their assignment, in this case, one of the students presented something called self-scaffolding, and it looked at 5 women and their practices, and this time really kind of focusing on the work in relation to text. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Hello. How are you? Where are my people? I see them. I see them. Can I share this with my... I'm Jody Patterson, and let's see, how do I advance this? With the clicker? Thank you. So a lot of what I've been doing over the last several years has been around identity, gender, which is then spread to race and class and regionality. And I use this slide to help me figure out a lot of the things that I then processed with my family. So I'm going to show you this one slide, and it'll be the only slide I show, because I'm really much better with storytelling. So I'm going to show this, quickly describe it, and then I'm going to tell you a story. So the genderbread person just gives us an understanding of how identity, attraction, sex, and expression can be very different things. So identity happens in the brain, right? Attraction is who you are feeling for, who you have feelings for. Sex, your genitals, and expression from the outside, how we present. They don't all necessarily go together in the way that we might think. They are individual and separate, but in a sense they operate because we are human and all of our components are together. And now I'm going to click off that, never to return. I will stay right there. So I've always been told that women are powerful, tenacious, and important, that we pull from limitless places, that we make magic wherever we go. I believed that beneath moments of weakness are endless reserves of strength. I probably don't need to tell you that I was raised by Southern Black women. But just a few years ago, I was feeling none of those powers. A friend of mine once told me that motherhood is about delivering optimism to your children. Optimism at all times, that was the goal. But it had become clear to me that women do in fact break. I was only pessimistic a few years back. I was 43 years old and I was exhausted, run ragged by the expectations and the pressures of this life that I had created. Most nights I wasn't sleeping, I was up tossing and turning, thinking about what tomorrow would surely bring. With my grown-up life in full swing, there was rarely enough time to pause. I counted this out recently. In the last 25 years, I have done 17 homes, 2 husbands, 5 children, 9 careers, and countless friendships. I had a schedule like many of us here that equated to 60-hour work weeks, and I just never stopped. The bullet, hit the target every single time, and I didn't stop until I hit that target. Penelope, my 3rd child, was the straw that broke the camel's back. So let me give you some perspective. My grandmother married 5 times. One man she married twice. She fought school boards and hospitals during the Civil Rights era and won. She had a master's and a PhD at a time when America wasn't even sure she should be in school. My mother married twice. She studied at Harvard, University of Strasbourg, and Wesleyan, and she studied French, because why not? My Aunt Lerma, very beautiful, but not at all interested in being the pretty woman, decided to have a child without a husband, to have love without legalities, and to have a career without caveats. She ended up having a child and spending many, many years with Gil Scott-Heron, who wrote The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. I come from a long line of women who do things differently. So my own atypical life was not at all alarming to me. I had learned self-determination from as far back as I can remember from my great-great-grandmother, who passed it down to all of us. And I was intent on passing it down to my daughters. But 3 generations later, Penelope was born. My 3rd child, who within the first year had turned into a grumpy, rebellious, troubled, angry baby. nightmares, nail biting until bloody, reoccurring nightmares, bedwetting, and complete protest around simple things like hairbrushing and getting dressed and just moving outside of the house. And on a normal day, we could not move out of the house. Even more than protest, Penelope had become a bully at home and on the playground, pushing brothers around, pushing friends around. One of those kids you just did not want your kid to be around. By the age of 2, most days were filled with fighting. So I'm a seasoned mother of 5, and temper tantrums don't scare me, but this was something different. Penelope had become a very heavy, dark child. So we tried everything we could think of to fix the problem. We did longer naps, we did more hugs, we switched to organic food, we pulled dairy. I thought maybe it was a dairy allergy. Everything in my motherly head to fix the surroundings, to fix the circumstances around us. Cutting hair helped, blue jeans helped, but they didn't get at the root of the issue. They weren't enough. So one day after round 1,000 of what seemed like an endless stream of fighting, I just tried a novel approach, and I picked Penelope up and I went into a room and I sat Penelope down and sat with Penelope and said, okay, what's really wrong? Why are you so angry? And Penelope revealed to me, because everyone thinks I'm a girl mama, and I'm not. So I thought, oh, we have a feminist. Okay, I get it. And I said, however you feel on the inside is fine. Right? It's what's on the inside that counts the most. How do you feel? And Penelope quickly said, no, Mama, I don't feel like a boy. I am a boy. So I thought, we have a lesbian. We have maybe someone who's aware. Penelope was only 3 at the time, but this was when my mother started teaching me about Billie Jean King and Shirley Chisholm and Nina Simone, women who've changed the world. So I thought this one is noticing the way in which this world works in the favor of men most of the time. She's noticing that feminine means soft and masculine means powerful, and she's choosing power. But that wasn't it either. Penelope is different. He likes basketball, high tops, math, science, getting straight A's. He also likes his full name, Penelope. These aren't things that are specific to gender, but he's told me these are the things he likes. Of course, as a mother, I tried to change Penelope and make Penelope into the girl that I thought Penelope should be, witty and smart and bold. But the more I tried, the sadder Penelope became and the sadder I became. Part of my fear was that I know that the world is unkind to those who are different, and so I believed that the same America that has been divided on race and love for so many centuries would be divided on my Penelope, a boy with a vagina. I say this because the words have to come out of my mouth so you can hear it. There are many people that don't fit the visual that we think. Over the past 8 years, I've had to reimagine my daughter as my son. I've had to wrap my head around Penelope as he, and I've had to simply let him be him, right? And allow him the space to walk in the world, space that wasn't given to him as a girl. Because although we intellectually understand that we shouldn't raise our children with bias, we do. So we speak sweetly to our daughters and we speak sternly to our boys and sometimes to our men, at least I was. We put butterflies on girl diapers and we put Spider-Man on boys. Girl toothbrushes have princesses and boys have superheroes. We let our boys fall down and get dirty and come up swinging, and we protect our daughters from rape culture and bad people and mean things, bad things in the world. More background on me. I'm a child of the 70s, and I grew up in New York City. My dad was from Harlem, and he raised us to have a lot of pride in ourselves. So when we wanted to wear our dirty blue jeans to Sunday church, and my mom would disapprove, my father would say, let the girls wear what they want. Who cares what they look like? They're happy. And if we didn't want to brush our hair, my dad would say, great. Who has the biggest afro by Easter? Right? It was about not being pretty. My dad said, you're not born to be pretty, you're born to challenge the status quo, to dream forward. It was always a challenge in my house. So here I am today at almost 50, and I'm forced to reimagine and dream forward in the most critical way yet. I need to reimagine new space for my child who doesn't fit into the space given. As adults, half of the time, we already know what the answer looks like, right? We've had the kid who doesn't want to brush their teeth. We know the coworker who goes low and we go high. All of these things, these tasks are arduous, but they're not surprising. But this I am a boy, it was like bouncing in my head with no reference point, no association. I love you, Mama, but I don't want to beat you. I want to be Papa. I don't want tomorrow to come because tomorrow my body will look like yours. I want to be Papa. It was then that I realized that the world I knew didn't include, acknowledge, or support my child. And that reality made me want to rethink the entire world. We need to flip it upside down if that's what it takes. So now, years later, I understand Penelope to be transgender. And now I no longer want to change him. I want to change myself. I want to change the way I interact with people. I want to expand my friend group, something as simple as that. I looked at my Facebook friends, and they all looked like me, Black, educated, cisgender women, and that didn't make sense to me, right? Nobody reflected what my family actually looks like. I mean, the group of my social friends only reflected me. So I want to change how I move in this world. Even the companies that I do business with need to be revamped. Instead of shifting my kid, I had to seismically shift my bias. I tell you all of this because the story of trans people seems to me to be shaping up very similarly to the story of women and of Blacks and of Jews and of all people of color and all marginalized people, all LGBT folks, where some people try to rewrite the history of others for their own benefit. As women, as mothers, lesbians, Jews, Blacks, Muslims, entrepreneurs, trailblazers, single women, difficult women, badasses, bitches. As anything deemed different, we can reimagine ourselves and be just as free. The culture I'm interested in cultivating, the one that I write about the most, is not of surface beauty. It is one of depth and of purpose, of training the mind to listen and to observe and absorb. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, it is that we are who we know ourselves to be, not how other people perceive us. Not the most revelatory of messages, but it's one that I keep going back to time and time again. I keep writing on it. I keep speaking it to my children. And so it needs to be our mission as women to steadily undo all of the stereotypes we've learned about ourselves that tell us who we're supposed to be and what we're expected to do. Let's dismantle any notion of an ideal woman, mother, person, girl, human, boy. We have to mantra what we want to become. So all day I was like, Penelope boy, because my brain and my tongue, they weren't doing the right thing together. So Penelope boy, Penelope boy. Now I mantra award-winning author, award-winning author, award-winning author. We have to mantra what we want it to be. Reimagining anything from scratch is difficult. A career, an identity, a gender. Breaking out of any confine requires a special effort. So here's how we reimagine in my house. It takes mental dexterity. Not everyone in my house agrees with what I'm saying. I have one kid, he's 13, he's a scientist, and he says, Penelope, let's be realistic here. You can do anything you want in this world. I trust you, I honor you, I will use the right pronouns, but scientifically speaking, anatomically speaking, you are a girl, female. Penelope waits because the rule is each person has the microphone, they get to say whatever their truth is. So then Penelope comes up and says his truth, which is, I am trans, I exist, I'm here, therefore I exist. There is no other proof more than me, and this is the way God has made me. And then my science kid says, well, yeah, God's not proven either. Like, all of that. God and transgender, like he doesn't see it. And this has been going on for 8 years, and they are no closer to agreeing. They've never gotten any closer, right? So the goal is not to agree, it is to discuss and debate with respect. Because really, the kid who doesn't believe in trans will have lived 20 years with a trans kid, right? And the trans kid will not be so overwhelmingly angry or broken by the conversation that's being had in the newspaper, right? Because he has one of those in his own family, right? So we are very diverse. The mind is malleable. People don't live in their hairstyles or their clothing or on Instagram. We don't live in a title or a job or an expectation. We don't even live within motherhood or womanness or feminism. We are more than one thing. We are spirit, we are infinite, and non-binary. It's simple. The trees can't be described as either short or tall. The ocean isn't either shallow or deep. Birds aren't sleek or fluffy, right? Nothing in the human or the natural existence is binary. So neither are humans. We cannot limit ourselves to be one of two choices. Recently, I've been reimagining myself as king. Not king over one person or over this, but I tell my kids, I'm king, and they say, no, Mama, you're a girl, you're a queen. I said, no, you're gonna have to sit on that for a couple of years, but I'm king, right? So we have to play with words. I also tell them I'm a starfish, that I can regrow pieces after trauma, after they've been severed, that we all can. We can reimagine ourselves over and over and over again. All of us can reimagine. We can be more than what our gender says, more than what society tells us we should be. If we write ourselves off as purely one thing, women do this and mothers do that, we will gravely underestimate our infinite potential. So I push us, women, mothers, difficult people, to reimagine ourselves in ways no one has ever suggested or written, because life must be traversed, experienced, and in the end, it must make us whole. Thank you.
Much shorter.
Hi, as you know, my name is Amy Padnani. I'm an editor on the obituaries desk at the New York Times. I'm also the creator of a project called Overlooked, which tells the stories of remarkable women and people of color who never got an obit in the New York Times since we started publishing in 1851. I went over this presentation with my cat the other day, but she fell asleep, so bear with me. Hopefully you'll find it a little bit more engaging. So my story begins when I started on the obituaries desk. I had been at the Times for about 8 years, but I joined Obits in early 2017. And at that point, the national debate on race was at a rolling boil, and the conversation on gender inequality had just started to bubble up again. And I wondered, as a journalist and as a woman of color, what could I do to help advance the conversation? There were all these people coming out of the shadows to tell stories of injustices that they had faced, and it really resonated with me. So I started noticing that we would get these emails from readers sometimes saying, why don't you have more women and people of color in your obituaries? And I thought, yeah, why don't we? I never noticed before, but the page is a sea of white men. So I went to my boss, the head of the obits desk, and I said, have you thought about this? Why is it that we don't have more women and people of color in our obits? And he said, well, the people dying today are from a generation when women and people of color were not invited to the table to make a difference. So talk to me in a generation or two. That's when we'll start to see more women and people of color in our obits. But that answer just wasn't... that answer just wasn't satisfying to me. So I wondered, how many of our obits were on women? Does anybody want to guess what percentage of our obits were on women? 2%? 5%? It was a little better than that, thankfully. 12, 15, 10. 15 was the closest. It was 20%. Just 1 in 5 of our obits was on a woman, which, while that's better than what you all said, is still really disappointing. So I wanted to know, where are all the dead women? So I started looking at our day-to-day process. How do we hear about people who are dying? The number one way is through reader submissions, and it's my hunch that we would hear more from women saying, oh, my husband died, my father died, my son died. We didn't hear as much from the men telling us about the women in their lives who died. And my hunch is that women are the gatherers, the glues of society. They just naturally thought to do this, to reach out to us. We also learned about people through social media, through other newspapers, and through a website called legacy.com. So I went to legacy.com, and they had a map that showed where their newspapers are from. Basically, they gather obituaries from 700 newspapers around the world. But they were from Canada, Ireland, Australia, the US, basically all these white-dominated countries. So I wondered if we could broaden our reach, maybe look at papers in Asia, Africa, Latin America, maybe countries where the mortality rate is higher for people at a younger age and where women are invited to the table sooner to make a difference. So all this was sort of swirling in my mind when one day I came across a website talking about Mary Outerbridge. She was credited with introducing tennis to America in 1874. And I thought, wow, how neat is that? One of the biggest sports in America was introduced by a woman. I wonder if she ever got a New York Times obituary. Spoiler alert, she did not. I jumped into Times Machine, which is a fascinating place if you've never been. It's basically the digital version of the newspaper from the day we started publishing, September 18th, 1851, until about 2002. So I started wondering who else we missed, and I would jump in here and type in names of people I would come across in my research. And then I was talking to some colleagues and telling them what I was up to, and they were excited. They said, ooh, did this person get an obit? Did that person get an obit? And before long, I had a list of a couple dozen names. So I went back to my boss, and I said, well, what do you think if we would tell their stories now? So we decided to go ahead with the series, and there were a lot of surprises. Ida B. Wells never got an obit. She was the pioneering journalist who started the campaign against lynching. The brilliant poet Sylvia Plath, Emily Warren Roebling, who finished building the Brooklyn Bridge when her husband, the engineer, became ill. And so Overlooked launched on March 8th, 2018, which was International Women's Day, with the stories of 15 remarkable women in history. And I knew that the series was powerful, or at least it was for me, but I didn't expect the reaction to be equally powerful. I came in to work the next day with about 200 emails. And normally if I have 200 emails, 199 are deletable and one is for me. But I couldn't find any to delete. They were all for me. They were from people who said, I cried on my way to work reading these stories because I felt seen for the first time in a long time. They were from people thanking us for finally giving these women a voice. They were from colleagues of mine who said, I never thought a woman of color at the New York Times would be allowed to achieve something like this. And they were from radio stations and media organizations that wanted to interview me. So that's a sampling of some of the interviews. The woman on the top right wanted to interview me while we were running, because I like to run. But that was a challenge. We tried telling our life story while gasping for air. So when I thought about it, it made sense, really, to us, editors at the Times. Obituaries are news stories. But for other people, obits really are more about life than they are about death. They're the last chance to tell a person's story and their legacy, their contribution to the world and to society. And so we put out a reader submission form asking people, who else do you think we missed? And to date, we have about 4,000 submissions. So luckily, the series is ongoing. I was hoping I could tell you about a couple of my favorites. There's Grandma Gatewood. She survived about 30 years of domestic violence at the hands of her husband. One time, he beat her so badly, he broke a broomstick over her head. And she, in response, threw some flour in his face. The police showed up and arrested her, not him. But then the mayor saw her in jail and took her into his own home until she could get back on her feet and get a divorce. And it was around this time she read an article in National Geographic that said no woman had hiked the Appalachian Trail in its entirety alone. So for those of you who don't know, the Appalachian Trail is a 2,000-mile path from Georgia to Maine. She said, you know what, I'm going to do it. And she took very little with her. She took a shower curtain for the rain. She took a comfortable pair of shoes, some snacks, and she set about her way. And then these reporters started catching wind of this old lady. She was a great grandma at that point, hiking in the woods alone. And there she was, traipsing across the television screen on the evening news while people were eating dinner, and they were really inspired. They said, if this 67-year-old woman can hike this path alone, maybe I can too. And so there was a camera crew waiting for her at the finish. And they said, how did you survive so rough a place? But they had no idea what she had survived before that. Another favorite of mine was Minnie Freeman. She was a school teacher in Nebraska in 1888 when there was a freak blizzard. It was so warm that morning, everybody left their jackets at home. But then the sky grew dark and the clouds came in, and the school teachers all wondered what to do. So one teacher kept the kids in overnight. Another teacher sent the kids home early. But in Minnie Freeman's classroom, the wind had already torn off the door and the roof, and it was getting pretty bad. So she found some twine, she wrapped it around all the children and around herself, scooped up the littlest one, and led them a mile to safety in the blizzard to a barn. She was called Nebraska's Fearless Maid, and she got something like 200 marriage proposals. So I heard about Minnie from a reader who was a school teacher in Nebraska who said I was always inspired by her story because teachers these days are expected to leap into bravery in really scary situations. So all of this was great. I know Overlooked was meaningful for a lot of people, but of course, one of the curses of being an ambitious person is you're rarely satisfied. And that was the case for me. I said, this didn't really fix my problem. What about the future of obituaries? How do I balance the gender ratio there? So to start, I figured I should gather some data. So I went down to our archives in the sub level of the basement under the New York Times building. We call it the morgue. And I went to talk to our archivist, Jeff Roth, that's him. He pointed me to this book, New York Times Obituaries Index, 1858 to 1968. And so it had the headline for every single obituary that had run in that time frame. So then we gave it to the New York Genealogical Society, and they digitized it for us. And then a computer programmer at the New York Times wrote a program that would scan all those headlines for Mr., Mrs., lady, sir, all these sort of gender-defining terms. And what he found was that between 1851 to about 2017, 10 to 21% of our obits were on women. It had never gone above that. So then I partnered with another programmer at the Times from our games team for something called Maker Week. It's where programmers are freed up from their day jobs to help build newsroom tools. And so he helped me build this thing called a diversity analysis tool. It sounds very dry, but it's super helpful for me. So basically, it automatically tallies the percentage of obits on men to women, month to month. There's a non-binary option too, but we haven't had that many. And then I asked him to program in a goal on the top right. That's what you see there. It's what would we have to do to get to 30% of our obits on women in the 1 year from Overlook launching, March 2018 to March 2019. And so I wanted 30% because we had never gotten to it before. And I'm really happy to say we got to about 31%. So it was really satisfying. I'm hoping that next year we can get to 35% and then 40% until we achieve parity. And then I'm also hoping to partner with this programmer to build a similar tool to measure people of color in our obituaries. So that was something that really bothered me. I wanted to get more men of color in our Overlooked project. And so I got to do that with Black History Month. We did a special section looking at the lives of about a dozen Black men and women. And again, there were some surprises. The composer Scott Joplin never got an obit. Margaret Garner, she was the subject of Toni Morrison's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, Beloved. She was a slave who killed her own baby so she wouldn't have to grow up into slavery. And it raised this question, is slavery worse than death? Her trial was covered nationally, but she was never named. And in fact, when we ran her Overlooked obituary, people wrote and said, I read Toni Morrison's novel, but I had no idea she was an actual person. And so then I wanted to include other men of color in the project, but rather than waiting for some particular month that celebrates these people, I decided to just go ahead. And starting a few weeks ago, I ran the Overlooked obituary for S.N. Goenka. He was a Burmese businessman who had these headaches, and they wouldn't go away with any meds. So a friend suggested he try meditation, and it worked so well that he decided he wanted to teach it himself. And he opened up about 100 centers worldwide. And he wouldn't just teach monks, he would teach anybody who wanted to learn. So we can kind of credit him today for spreading mindfulness to the West as we know it. So that's pretty much where I'm at. Thanks so much.